Imagine boarding a commercial flight, settling into your economy seat, and hearing the distinct, synchronized click of 100 lighters flaring up the moment the wheels leave the tarmac. Within seconds, a thick, blue-gray fog rolls down the aisle, swirling around your head like a weather system. But nobody coughs. Nobody waves their hand in front of their face. In fact, the flight attendant smiles and hands you a complimentary pack with your lunch. Welcome to the 1960s, a time when the world wasn't quite so fragile. You see, today we have our gluten-free anxieties, our kale smoothies, and a society so terrified of its own shadow that we practically wrap ourselves in bubble wrap just to check the mail. We are so enlightened now, aren't we? Obsessing over microplastics while staring at blue light screens for 12 hours a day. But back then, life was raw. It was unfiltered, literally. From the maternity ward to the executive boardroom, the ashtray was the altar of civilization. But how did we go from lighting up in hospitals to shivering in the rain outside office buildings like outcasts? And what did we actually lose when the smoke finally cleared? Because looking back through the haze, it seems like we lost a certain kind of freedom that feels completely alien to our terrified modern sensibilities. If you want to receive more stories like this one, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe, because we are about to inhale the truth about the smoky, rebellious, and unapologetic 1960s. To truly understand the atmosphere of the 1960s, you have to realize that smoke wasn't just a byproduct of combustion. It was the very texture of reality. It was the filter through which the entire decade was viewed, a bluish-gray haze that softened the edges of a world that was rapidly changing. If you walked into an office building in 1965, you wouldn't be greeted by the sterile, antiseptic smell of filtered air and the faint, depressing hum of a server room like you are today. No, you would be hit by a wall of sensory input that screamed industry and importance. The air would be thick, rich, and heavy, smelling of burnt Virginia tobacco, leather polish, and the kind of aggressive aftershave that men wore when they actually fixed their own cars. It was a masculine, dominant atmosphere. Compare that to the modern workplace, where we have designated wellness zones, and HR sends out a company-wide email if someone microwaves fish or wears a perfume that is slightly too floral, because apparently our delicate modern constitutions might crumble at the slightest sensory inconvenience. We are so busy optimizing our ergonomic standing desks and tracking our hydration levels on smart water bottles that we forgot how to just exist. Back then, nobody needed a safe space because the entire world was raw. You sat at your desk, you pulled out a pack of Lucky Strikes, you struck a match against the side of your heavy metal filing cabinet, and you got to work. The desk itself was a landscape dedicated to the habit. Every surface had a heavy crystal ashtray, the kind that could double as a blunt weapon in a pinch, usually filled with the crushed remnants of the morning's brainstorming session. This ubiquity of smoking created a completely different social geometry. Today, if you want to smoke, you are banished. You are a pariah, forced to huddle outside in the rain near the dumpster, shivering like a castaway, looked down upon by people sipping their $6 oat milk lattes who think they are morally superior because they do yoga on Tuesdays. But in the 60s, the cigarette was the ultimate social lubricant. It was a universal language. If you were in a meeting and things got tense, you didn't ask for a timeout or suggest a mindfulness breathing exercise. You offered the other guy a cigarette. The click of a Zippo lighter was a form of punctuation. It signaled agreement, contemplation, or a pause in the hostilities. The simple act of lighting someone else's cigarette was a gesture of intimacy and respect that we have completely lost. It was a ritual, a synchronized dance of hands and fire that happened everywhere, in boardrooms, in elevators, and yes, even in hospitals. It sounds insane to our hypersanitized, germ-phobic minds, doesn't it? The idea of a doctor walking into a patient's room, checking a chart with one hand and holding a burning camel in the other. But that was the reality. Doctors were actually featured in advertisements, proudly declaring which brand was smoother on the throat. Can you imagine the sheer panic that would cause today? We live in a world where we put warning labels on hot coffee cups because we forgot that heat burns, yet back then, the very people responsible for keeping you alive were casually inhaling carcinogens while listening to your heartbeat. And the funny thing is, people seemed less neurotic about their health then than we are now. We obsess over every calorie, every macronutrient, every potential toxin in our organic kale, and yet we are more anxious and fragile than a generation that practically lived on red meat, martini lunches, and unfiltered tobacco. They had a resilience, a toughness that has been slowly eroded by our obsession with safety. This haze extended far beyond the workplace. It permeated the home in a way that would make a modern parent call Child Protective Services. The dinner table was a prime smoking location. The concept of "wait until you're finished eating" was a loose suggestion at best. The ash would sometimes drift dangerously close to the pot roast, but nobody batted an eye. It was just seasoning. And let's talk about the television. When you turned on the TV, you weren't watching people pretending to be perfect. You watched news anchors, the most trusted men in America, delivering the evening report with a cigarette burning in the ashtray next to their script. It gave them gravitas. It made them look like they were thinking, deeply and seriously, about the state of the world. Today, a news anchor can't even have a messy hair day without Twitter having a meltdown, let alone smoke on air. We have sanitized our media to the point where it feels artificial, plastic, and devoid of human vice. But back then, seeing Edward R. Murrow or Walter Cronkite through a veil of smoke made you feel like you were in the room with them, sharing the burden of the news. The infrastructure of the world was built for smokers. Cars came standard with lighters and ashtrays in every armrest, front and back. The dashboard lighter was a marvel of engineering, a glowing red coil of heat that was ready in seconds. It wasn't a power outlet for charging your phone so you could scroll through TikTok for 3 hours. It was a tool for fire. Airplanes were essentially flying lounges. The non-smoking section was a joke, usually just a few rows separated by a flimsy curtain that did absolutely nothing to stop the laws of gas diffusion. But nobody complained. You sat there, at 30,000 feet, enjoying a steak dinner and a smoke, feeling like a king. Now, flying is an exercise in humiliation, where you are herded like cattle, stripped of your shoes, and forbidden from bringing a bottle of water, all while seated in a chair designed for a toddler. We traded the luxury of the 60s for the safety of the modern era. And frankly, looking at the legroom and the miserable faces on a modern flight, it's hard to argue we got the better deal. This culture of smoking was also deeply tied to the concept of cool. And I don't mean the manufactured influencer-style cool we have today, where people pose with products they don't use. I mean genuine, effortless cool. The way a film star held a cigarette, the way the smoke curled around a jazz musician in a dimly lit club, it was aesthetic perfection. It added mystery. It added a layer of visual poetry to the mundane. A silhouette in a doorway wasn't just a person. With a cigarette, it was a story. We have stripped our world of this noir atmosphere. Everything now is bright, high definition, and exposed. There are no shadows left, no mysteries, just 4K resolution showing us every pore and flaw. The smoke of the 60s provided a soft focus lens for reality, blurring the harsh lines and making everything look just a little bit more cinematic. If you are enjoying this trip back to a time when people weren't afraid of the air they breathed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to receive more stories like this one, because we are going to keep digging into the archives of history. But beneath the cool exterior and the social rituals, there was a massive machine keeping this haze alive. It wasn't just that people liked to smoke, it was that they were constantly told that smoking was the hallmark of a successful, happy life. The advertising of the era was aggressive, brilliant, and everywhere. You couldn't walk a block without seeing a billboard of a rugged cowboy or a sophisticated socialite enjoying a puff. They sold us a lifestyle, a dream of maturity and freedom, and we bought it pack by pack. It's fascinating to look back at how easily we were led, but then again, looking at how we blindly follow modern trends, obsessing over the latest superfood or tech gadget that promises to fix our lives, are we really any different? We just swapped the nicotine for dopamine hits from our screens. We judge the 60s for their blindness to the risks, yet we ignore the toxins of our own making, pretending that because our air is smoke-free, our lives are somehow cleaner. But as we peel back the layers of this smoky decade, we realize that the haze wasn't just obscuring the health risks. It was covering up a society that was about to undergo a radical, painful transformation. The smoke was the calm before the storm. The comfortable blanket we pulled over ourselves before the cold reality of the late 20th century woke us up. The cultural saturation was so absolute that it transcended mere habit and became the primary aesthetic of the era's identity. If you look at the cinema of the early 1960s, the cigarette was a supporting actor with more screen time than most of the cast. It was a prop that conveyed emotion without a single line of dialogue being spoken. A character lighting a cigarette with shaky hands told you they were terrified. A character blowing a perfect smoke ring told you they were in total control. The smoke itself acted as a visual metaphor for the mystery and moral ambiguity of the time, swirling around the faces of Bogart wannabes and femme fatales, creating a literal atmosphere of suspense that modern 4K cameras, with their clinical, hyper-realistic precision, simply cannot replicate. Today, we have CGI to create dragons and spaceships, but we can't seem to recreate the simple, raw charisma of a human being leaning against a brick wall, shrouded in blue smoke, looking like they actually have a soul. Instead, we have influencers taking 47 photos of their avocado toast, trying to find the perfect angle to prove they are happy. The 60s didn't need to try that hard. The cool was effortless because it was dangerous. This allure was manufactured, of course, by the absolute titans of Madison Avenue, men who treated consumer psychology like a contact sport. They understood something that modern marketing, with its desperate algorithmic pandering, has completely forgotten. You don't sell the product. You sell the feeling of power. And nothing screamed power like the Marlboro Man. Before the 60s, filtered cigarettes were seen as somewhat effeminate, a niche product. But then came the cowboy. He was rugged, he was solitary, and he was the master of his domain. He didn't need a wellness app to tell him to breathe. He breathed fire. This campaign didn't just sell tobacco, it rebranded masculinity itself. It told men that to be a man was to be independent, weathered, and inseparable from his pack of reds. Compare that to today, where the height of masculinity in advertising is a guy applying moisturizer while apologizing for his carbon footprint. We have traded the cowboy for the neurotic urbanite, and while our lungs might be cleaner, our cultural spirit feels decidedly asthmatic. But the marketing genius wasn't limited to men. The 1960s saw the aggressive targeting of women, hijacking the language of the feminist movement to sell addiction as liberation. "You've come a long way, baby," the ads crooned, showing confident pantsuit-wearing women holding their own against the patriarchy, a slim cigarette in hand as the ultimate symbol of equality. Smoking became a way to claim space, to say, "I have the right to the same vices as the boys." It was a twisted form of empowerment, sure, but it felt real. It was a rebellion against the domestic drudgery of the 50s housewife. Today, corporate empowerment is a hashtag on a shampoo bottle or a sanitized HR seminar about synergy. Back then, it was a tangible, physical act of defiance. And let's not forget the diet angle. Cigarettes were openly marketed as appetite suppressants. Why eat a heavy lunch when you could have a light smoke? It kept you thin, it kept you chic. We look back in horror at this now as we blend our kale and count our macros, terrified of gluten. Yet we line up to inject ourselves with diabetes medication just to shed a few pounds because we lack the discipline to just stop eating. Is that really progress? Or is it just a different, more medicalized form of vanity? The peak of this hazy empire was arguably around 1963. The cigarette vending machine was the monolith of this civilization. They stood like sentinels in every lobby, restaurant, and gas station, glowing mechanical dispensaries of pleasure. You didn't need an ID, a background check, or a retinal scan. You needed a couple of quarters and a functioning thumb. A 10-year-old could walk up, buy a pack for his dad or himself, and nobody called the police. It was a world that assumed a certain level of personal responsibility, or perhaps a certain level of fatalism. We trusted people to navigate the world's dangers. Now, we live in a society where you practically need a notary public to buy a bottle of cough syrup, and playground equipment is made of soft rubber so little Timmy doesn't get a bruise that might lead to a lawsuit. We have child-proofed the entire world, creating a generation that has never touched a sharp edge, while the kids of the 60s were playing with lawn darts and buying Luckies from a machine while their parents were inside drinking martinis. However, just as the party seemed like it would go on forever, just as the smoke was thickest, the music came to a screeching, grinding halt. The date was January 11th, 1964. This is the moment the narrative shifts, the midpoint twist in the story of the American century. It was a Saturday, chosen deliberately to minimize the crash of the stock market, when Surgeon General Luther Terry stepped up to a podium in a crowded auditorium. The irony of the scene was palpable. The room was reportedly filled with reporters smoking nervously, creating a fog bank that the Surgeon General had to peer through to deliver the death blow. He released the Report on Smoking and Health, a 387-page bombshell that did what no one had dared to do. It officially, scientifically, and governmentally linked smoking to lung cancer and heart disease. Before this moment, the dangers of smoking were whispered about, dismissed as coughing spells, or buried by tobacco industry propaganda. But Terry put it in black and white. It was a seismic shock. You have to understand, this wasn't just a health announcement. It was a cultural betrayal. The government was telling the public that their best friend, their constant companion, their source of comfort and cool, was actually a serial killer. It shattered the illusion of the safe modern life. For years, people believed that if it was sold in a store, it must be fine. Suddenly, the veil was lifted. But here is the truly fascinating and perhaps most human part of the story. The reaction wasn't immediate compliance. People didn't collectively stomp out their cigarettes and sign up for marathons. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of the report, cigarette sales actually stayed steady and then, incredibly, went up. Why? Because of pure, unadulterated denial and defiance. It was the ultimate "don't tell me what to do" moment. The tobacco companies, sensing the existential threat, didn't fold. They doubled down. They launched the frank statement to cigarette smokers, a masterclass in gaslighting that sowed doubt about the science. They created a controversy where there wasn't one, a tactic we see used today for everything from climate change to basic nutrition. Picture this. It's 3:00 a.m., rain is hammering against the window, and your child is burning up with a fever. In 1950, you didn't panic and rush to an overcrowded emergency room. You picked up the phone, and within the hour, a silhouette appeared at your front door, a man in a trench coat, shaking off his umbrella, carrying a worn leather bag. He sat at the bedside, he knew your family's history by heart, and he stayed until the danger passed. There were no clipboards, no insurance pre-approvals, just a human being helping another human being in their own home. Now, compare that to the absolute utopia we live in today. Because obviously, the smartest thing to do when you are sick and contagious is to drag yourself out of bed, drive through traffic, and sit in a freezing waiting room for 2 hours filling out forms on an iPad that doesn't work. All for the incredible privilege of seeing a doctor for exactly 7 minutes before they rush you out to keep up with their quota. Truly, we have reached the peak of civilization, but how did we let this intimacy slip away? How did the doctor go from being a trusted guest at the dinner table to a stranger behind a computer screen? To understand what we've lost, we have to open that black bag and look inside. To understand the gravity of what we have lost, we have to transport ourselves back to a time when the world moved at the speed of a horse's trot, not a fiber optic cable. Let's dial the clock back to the turn of the 20th century, or even the 1930s and 40s. In this era, the doctor wasn't a remote entity hidden behind a labyrinth of receptionists and automated phone menus. He was a neighbor. He was the man who likely brought you into this world on your parents' quilt-covered mattress, and he would likely be the one to hold your hand when you left it. The practice of medicine wasn't an industry, it was a vocation, a calling that required a level of personal sacrifice that is almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. The centerpiece of this entire ritual was the black bag. It is the ultimate symbol of the era, a worn, heavy leather satchel that smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol, old tobacco, and dried herbs. That bag was a portable hospital. It didn't contain a tablet for data entry or a card reader for your copay. It held the tangible tools of salvation. Inside, nestled in velvet-lined compartments, were glass vials of morphine, digitalis for the heart, and sulfa powder for infection. There was the heavy metal binaural stethoscope, not the disposable plastic toys you see today, but a cold, precise instrument that the doctor would warm in his palms before placing it on a child's chest. That simple gesture, warming the instrument, speaks volumes about the philosophy of the time. It was care first, efficiency second. Compare that to the glorious efficiency of modern healthcare, where care often feels like being processed through a meat grinder. Today, if you're lucky enough to get an appointment within 3 months of actually being sick, you're greeted not by a warm hand, but by a stack of paperwork asking if you've traveled to a foreign country recently or if you're allergic to latex. You sit in a sterile, fluorescent-lit box that smells of industrial cleaner and despair, waiting for a provider who is contractually obligated to spend no more than 15 minutes with you. It's truly a marvel of modern engineering how we've managed to optimize the humanity right out of healing. We have traded the comforting weight of the doctor's hand on our shoulder for the cold glow of a computer monitor as the physician types away, making more eye contact with the screen than with your suffering. But back then, the diagnosis was an art form, a sensory experience that required the doctor to be a detective of the human body. Without x-rays in every room or MRI machines whirring in the basement, the country doctor had to rely on his 5 senses. He didn't order a battery of lab tests to cover his liability insurance. He looked at you. He looked at the color of your fingernails to check for anemia. He smelled your breath. Sweet meant diabetes. Foul might mean a lung abscess. He listened to the rhythm of your heart, not just for the beats, but for the whispers between them. He palpated your abdomen, his fingers reading the tension in your muscles like Braille. It was an intimate, invasive, and deeply human connection. He knew the difference between a cough caused by dust from the harvest and a cough that signaled the early stages of consumption, not because a machine told him, but because he knew your life, he knew you worked in the mill, he knew your roof leaked, he knew your father had a weak heart. This context was the most powerful medicine in his arsenal. Today, your medical history is a fragmented digital file scattered across 6 different hospital systems that don't talk to each other. Back then, the database was the doctor's memory. He knew that your family had a genetic predisposition to melancholy, or that your joints ached when the rain came from the east. This wasn't just data. It was wisdom. It allowed him to treat the person, not just the disease. If you enjoy diving into these lost chapters of history and want to keep uncovering the stories that shaped who we used to be, please take a second to leave a like and subscribe. It tells us you want more of these deep dives into the past. The journey to the patient was often as harrowing as the illness itself. We aren't talking about a paved commute in a climate-controlled sedan with heated seats. The country doctor was an adventurer. In the dead of winter, when the snow drifts were high enough to bury a fence post, he would hitch up his horse or crank start a Model T that had to be coaxed into life with boiling water poured over the manifold. He crossed swollen creeks where bridges had washed away, navigated mud that could swallow a buggy wheel whole, and faced the biting wind for hours. And he did this because he knew that if he didn't, nobody else would. There was no backup. There was no 911 dispatch center to route a helicopter. There was just him, his bag, and his conscience. When he arrived, the dynamic shifted. He wasn't a visitor. He was taking command of the chaotic household, yet he did so with the grace of a guest. The kitchen table became the operating theater. Sheets were boiled on the stove. The family was enlisted as nurses and assistants. The father might be asked to hold the lantern steady, the mother to keep the water boiling. This involvement demystified medicine. It made the family active participants in the survival of their loved ones, rather than helpless bystanders waiting in a lobby reading year-old magazines. Of course, looking at our advanced society now, we should be so grateful that we don't have to boil water or hold lanterns. Instead, we have the privilege of navigating automated phone trees. Press 1 if you are dying. Press 2 if you are just thinking about dying. Press 3 to hear our holiday hours. It is a system designed to keep the sick at arm's length, to sanitize the messiness of illness. We have sterilized the environment so thoroughly that we accidentally sterilized the compassion too. We have specialists for the left nostril and different specialists for the right nostril, and neither of them knows your name. The house call doctor, however, was a generalist in the truest sense. He was a surgeon, an obstetrician, a psychiatrist, and a pharmacist all rolled into one exhausted man. He might set a broken leg in the morning, deliver twins at noon, and sit by the bedside of a dying elder in the evening, offering nothing but morphine and company because there was nothing else to be done. And that presence, the simple act of being there, was often the most potent drug he carried. He couldn't always cure, but he always cared. He didn't leave when the clock struck 5. He left when the fever broke or when the end came. This integration into the family unit meant that payment was often flexible. In the modern world, if your credit card is declined, you might as well be invisible. But the old-school doctor operated on a different currency. During the Great Depression, he might be paid in chickens, a sack of potatoes, a cord of wood, or simply a promise. "I'll pay you when the harvest comes in, Doc." And that was good enough. Can you imagine telling a modern hospital billing department, "I'll pay you in fresh corn next September"? You'd be sent to collections before you even reached the parking lot. The transaction used to be based on honor and community survival. Now it is based on codes, deductibles, and the bottom line. The shift from medicine as a community service to medicine as a corporate product is perhaps the greatest tragedy of the modern age, a shift that began the moment the doctor stopped knocking on your door and started making you knock on his. But to truly understand the depth of this relationship, we have to look at the specific challenges they faced. The terrifying nights where the contents of that black bag were the only thing standing between life and death. The darkness of those nights was not merely physical. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of uncertainty that settled over the household when the diagnosis was grim. We must remember that for the longest time, the doctor's bag did not contain the miracle of antibiotics. Before the widespread use of penicillin in the mid-20th century, a simple scratch from a rusty nail could be a death sentence. A sore throat wasn't just an annoyance to be numbed with a lozenge. It was the potential harbinger of the strangling angel. diphtheria, a terrifying specter that haunted the nurseries of the past. When the doctor walked into a room and heard that specific, raspy, barking cough, his blood ran cold in a way that no modern physician, safe in their sterile fortress, can possibly understand. He didn't have the luxury of swabbing a throat and sending it off to a lab that would email results in 3 days. He had to act on instinct and immediate observation. Imagine the scene. The only light comes from a kerosene lamp cast upon the frightened faces of parents huddled in the corner. The doctor is stripping off his coat, rolling up his sleeves, and preparing to perform a tracheotomy right there on the dining table. He is boiling his scalpel in a pot of water on the wood stove, the steam rising to mix with the smoke of the fire. There is no anesthesiologist to monitor vitals, no beeping machines to tell him if oxygen levels are dropping. There is only the doctor's steady hand and the terrifying sound of a child fighting for air. He cuts into the windpipe, inserts a silver tube, and literally breathes life back into the patient. This was high-wire acrobatics, without a net. Now, let's pivot to the miraculous present day, where we have supposedly evolved beyond such barbarism. Today, if you have a sore throat, you don't get a hero with a silver tube. You get a telehealth appointment with a pixelated stranger who freezes every 10 seconds because your Wi-Fi connection isn't strong enough. You hold your phone camera up to your open mouth, looking ridiculous, while the provider on the other end, who is likely simultaneously shopping for shoes on a second monitor, prescribes you a generic antibiotic that you probably don't need just to get you off the line. We have traded the heroic, life-saving intervention of the family doctor for the bureaucratic efficiency of a vending machine. We have convinced ourselves that this is progress because we have digital records, yet we have lost the visceral, tactile ability to actually save a life with our bare hands. But the true burden of the country doctor wasn't just the procedures, it was the weight of being the sole arbiter of fate in his community. He carried the secrets of the town in that leather bag alongside the morphine. He knew whose husband was drinking away the grocery money, he knew which child was not actually the father's son, and he knew who was slowly dying of a broken heart rather than a failed heart. This psychological burden was immense. He couldn't refer a patient to a specialist in the next county because the roads were impassable or the family had no money. He was the specialist. He was the oncologist, the cardiologist, and the grief counselor. When a child was lost to scarlet fever, it wasn't a case fatality to be logged in a spreadsheet. It was the miller's daughter, the one who gave him an apple every time he rode past. He had to attend the funeral, look the parents in the eye, and then go home and try to sleep, knowing he would have to do it all over again the next day. This brings us to the most profound realization, a twist in our understanding of why the house call was superior to modern medicine. We often think the house call was just about convenience, a delivery service for healthcare, but it was actually a superior diagnostic tool. This is the secret that modern medicine has completely forgotten. When a doctor visits you today, he sees you in a vacuum. You are a specimen in a white paper gown, removed from your natural habitat. You tell him, "I've been coughing," and he listens to your lungs. But when the old school doctor came to your house, he didn't just hear the cough. He saw the black mold growing in the corner of the ceiling. He didn't just hear you complain of stomach pains, he saw the unrefrigerated stew sitting on the counter. He didn't just hear you talk about anxiety, he saw the tension in the way your spouse looked at you, or the pile of unpaid bills on the sidebar. He was diagnosing the environment, not just the organism. This is the critical piece of the puzzle we have thrown away. In our arrogance, we believe that biology exists independently of biography. We think we can treat a human being like a car, drive it into the shop, swap out a part, and drive it out. But the old doctor knew that the shop was the problem. He could cure a case of nerves by prescribing a vacation not because he was guessing, but because he saw the chaos of the household. He could cure a recurring rash by noticing the type of soap the family used in the wash basin. He was a Sherlock Holmes of the domestic sphere, gathering clues that a modern doctor, staring at a blood test result on a screen, would never, ever see. Contrast this with the absolute farce of the modern checkup. You walk into an office that is kept at a temperature suitable for meat storage. You are asked to list your symptoms on a form that asks for your insurance information 3 separate times. When you finally see the doctor, you are on your best behavior. You don't mention that you're stressed about your job, you don't mention that you're eating fast food 5 times a week, and you certainly don't mention the dampness in your basement. You present a curated version of yourself. And the doctor, pressed for time and buried in compliance protocols, treats the curated version, not the real you. It is a theater of the absurd where both parties pretend to be engaged in healing while the root causes of illness, lifestyle, environment, family dynamics go completely unaddressed.